Yeah, like Alexandra said, I think it's a difficult question to answer, but I think with the solutionists that are out there, the young people who are implementing solutions, I'm a huge believer that we can really mitigate, not only mitigate, but reverse the effects. I'm that optimistic that I'm super, optimistic about the solutions that exist right now. We just have to be implementing these solutions in order to really see the effects of those solutions. And so I definitely am optimistic, and I think that we definitely can reverse the effects of climate change only if we were to, open up our hearts, like Elizabeth Watuti says, and really kind of implement the solutions that exist and those solutions that are already coming about. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Over to you, Kevin Johnson.
Thank you. I think that the short answer is that we have to adapt and overcome in order to survive. And I think, Julie, you hit on the point about mitigation. I think part of it is recognizing that we are in a crisis. And anytime you are in a crisis, you have to make very hard decisions, very complex decisions. And a lot of times it's a function of mitigation of the worst effects. And the thing that gives me a lot of hope and motivation, and again, you mentioned some of the books you read and or have read, and not a lot of people would read DoD policy, Department of Defense policies, but I'd highly recommend folks out there just to Google Department of Defense studies on climate change or the national security implications of climate change to the national security interests of the United States. And you'll find a tremendous amount of research and studies that have been done. At the end of the day, the Department of Defense of the United States, good, bad, or indifferent, is the lead agency to have to respond to crisis around the world. And they take that very, very seriously. So there's a lot of thinking and planning to mitigate for those worst effects. But I think that the solutions forward are also very, very compelling. The capital markets react to the opportunities for stable returns. So on the capitalistic side, there is a tremendous amount of interest from sovereign wealth funds, from infrastructure banks and funds, and the insurance and reinsurance market. I mean, look at it from the financial perspective, that these severe weather effects have incredible effects on the insurance and reinsurance markets. And these institutions are very focused on financing the technologies of the future. So, I think you'll see a lot of investments coming forward in this space from the private sector, and not just leaning on the government solutions. The last thing I'll note is that in a time of crisis, in a time like this, there will be some complex decisions made by policymakers that may not seem in the best interest of the climate interest. And I think the key thing is to not give up hope when tough decisions are made, like potentially increasing oil supply at critical times to keep the economies afloat, that keep pressing forward on these climate solutions, because they are the solutions and the technologies of the future.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a good point, Kevin Johnson, and I think the war in Ukraine was evidence that we didn't have the infrastructure grids to really supply energy to communities. So it was really controversial within the climate sphere of, let's double down on fossil fuels because we need to keep energy up, especially with the supply. But I actually take an approach that if we have all the technology, I mean, not just renewables, but there's tidal, there's geothermal. I mean, a lot of people focus on nuclear, but I think that with tidal, geothermal, wind, solar, photovoltaics, like really innovating in renewables, but then battery storage. Like if we could efficiently update our grid system, then we wouldn't be running into this energy shortage, because I've talked to a lot of people on this and they're like, well, we've got to double down on fossil fuels because like we need to supply energy. But what if we really update our grid, our microgrids, the grids to distribute energy globally? That's what it is in the storage. And I think that what I'm really wanting to push for with working with you, Kevin Johnson, is like getting the best of the best renewable energies within the DPA so that we don't default to, oh, let's double down on fossil fuels, because we do not have a choice in this if we continue to emit 34 billion tons of CO2 per year. And I actually wrote an op-ed with Kevin Patel, who's on here, and we received not so favorable responses, but we felt like speaking out because 4 days after COP26, President Biden decided to move forward with lease case 257, and which would have been the largest oil and gas lease sale in U.S. history off the Gulf of 80 million acres. And so we spoke out and said, hey, like, you just made promises in COP, but now you're doubling down on fossil fuel infrastructure. Like, that's a huge disconnect. So that's when I started really diving into this. And I know, Alexandra, you too were like, what the heck? So I think it's about like holding accountability while also not like, while also creating allies. Because you don't want to like call out, you want to call out, but in a way that's not shaming, but calling in, and really making sure that we're shifting, because at the end of the day, like my nephews, my niece, their lives are at stake unless we really turn this around. And so I really do, sorry, I just went off on a tangent, but I do think that we can get to a place where we don't have to default to let's double down on fossil fuels, where we can actually update our grids, get the battery technology there, and have more intermittent like photovoltaics and solar and wind, and harness it and then distribute it. That's what gives me hope. And it's an honor to be working with all of you, because I know you understand the urgency of what we're up against, and we can't gloss over that urgency, but we can still remain optimistic. But I do hear you, Kevin Johnson, that we can't afford energy shortages either, because people have to like have heating, they have to get to work. And so this is a complicated problem, but with complicated problems come complicated, not so complicated solutions. And so that's what's exciting about this moment that we're in. I'm wondering what the time is on this, but I was wanting to ask you, I have 2 more questions for you guys. I wanted to ask, let's start with you, Kevin Johnson, because you're really an expert in renewable energy. Can you talk about why clean energy is an important climate solution? I know
Julie, I was there, but I think we just have about 2 minutes, so I'll be very brief. As far as why is renewable energy a critical climate solution? At the end of the day, we're talking about reducing the carbon in the emissions in the air. We're talking about ensuring reliable delivery of electricity globally. So the technologies are there. They're financed. They're debt financed. They're creating jobs. Right. So from a technology perspective, they can reduce the carbon emissions from the air. And as our systems come closer together, from transportation fuels to electricity, as we come together with electric vehicles and renewable energy generation, it's just more efficient over time. Again, it's a long arc to get there, but it requires the dedicated investments with capital and of time as we move forward. So I'll pause there since we have 1 minute left.
Apologies, I'm not really keeping track of time, but given that we have a short amount of time, I want to turn it over to you, Alexandria and Kevin, real quick in a few sentences. Can you just say what like initiative you want people, or how can they help you in your work, basically? Like if you can share with the audience.
My main things in a few short words is I want you to be a fan of the Youth Climate Movement. I want you to fund us, amplify us, narrate your climate stories, and be a fan of the climate movement. So. And
visit earthuprising.org, right, Alexandra? Yeah, please visit her organization. Over to you, Kevin Patel.
Yeah, like Alexandra said, fund the Youth Climate Movement, but especially fund youth solutionists. They are eco-entrepreneurs that are doing amazing work to implement the solutions now. Fund them, support them, amplify them, do as much as you can to make sure that the solutions get implemented. And if you want, visit oneupaction.org to do that exact thing that I just said, to amplify young solutionists that are doing this work to implement solutions all around the globe. But with that, I will turn it back to Julia.
Thank you, guys. You guys are all awesome. And thank you for being part of Clean Energy Freedom. I can't wait to continue working with all of you. It's been an honor to be on this panel with you. And thank you, audience, for tuning in. Thank you, everyone.